was a lot to unpack from last night and plenty of questions about what's happening. And to help us all make sense of this is a man who's probably been up all night but still looks good. Chief White House correspondent. John, and author of Front Row at the You Know Who Show. Our pal, Jonathan Karl. Good morning, afternoon, Jonathan Karl.
Good morning, good afternoon.
How are you, honey?
Good evening.
How you holding up?
I'll tell you, it's the night never ended, so I don't know what time it is or where I am, but this is one hell of a story. And Whoopi, you know, the bottom line is, there are a lot of votes that still need to be counted. There are a lot of votes, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania. By my count, we're about 1.4 million early and absentee votes that have not been counted yet. And when the margin is at 600,000, I don't know what's going to happen in the state of Pennsylvania. And I think we're looking at multiple states where you're going to see recounts. And I got to tell you, I lived through the Florida recount. I was covering the Gore campaign when that all happened. That was one state. I see we could easily have recounts in several states with what's going on. The margins are so incredibly close. Nevada, Arizona.
Well, if the Snowflake keeps crying about this, you're probably going to be, a couple of times you're going to be recounting in multiple states. So this could be a year of recounts, really, with the Snowflake.
Well, we do have some deadlines. We do have, for one, January 20th, when there's an inauguration that's going to happen one way or another. The Electoral College is going to meet. All that's going to happen. I mean, we have a process. We have a system. I was, quite frankly, shocked in the wee hours of the night when I saw the President of the United States come out at what was essentially a campaign event at the White House to the sounds of Hail to the Chief, and to hear him say, to suggest that the counting of votes was a matter of disenfranchising people and committing a fraud and stealing an election. This is the process. This will go forward. And there's a very important point here. He talked about going to the Supreme Court to stop it. The Supreme Court's not going to stop anything. The states will count the votes. He can say whatever he wants, but the votes will be counted. At the end of the day, this is really close. He may win, even with a complete and total count, or he may lose. But the count will happen, and there will be a result. And if he likes it or doesn't like it, doesn't matter.
And John, this is actually not out of the ordinary. It is usual for us to be counting even days after a presidential election. It happened in 2016. It benefited Trump. And by the way, it's happening in Arizona because Trump still wants it to happen in Arizona.
Exactly.
But anyways, I have a question for you about the polls, because this was supposed to be a landslide for Biden. People were talking about the blue wave. It was going to be this drastic change in the Senate. So, you know, for people like me who have poll PTSD from 2016, what went wrong with the poll numbers again this time?
Anna, this was a catastrophic failure of public opinion polling. A catastrophic failure that was considerably actually worse than 4 years ago. And let's, before we get into the states, just look at where the popular vote stands right now. It's about 2% separating them. When the polls were, we had several supposedly reputable polls showing a double-digit lead in the national popular vote for Joe Biden. That's obviously not there and is not going to be there. Joe Biden's going to win the popular vote, but it's going to be pretty close and nowhere near what the polls suggested. And then this time around, unlike 4 years ago, there were a lot of major polling organizations that dedicated significant resources to polling in the states that would determine the Electoral College. And those state polls suggested that Biden had a prohibitive lead in Wisconsin and in Michigan and, to a slightly lesser extent, in Pennsylvania. And now it looks like, I mean, Biden may still win all of those states. He's leading in 2 out of the 3 right now. I don't know, as I said, what is truly going to happen in any of them, but he may win them. If he does, it's going to be really, really close, nowhere near what the public polling said.
Jonathan, there are states like Pennsylvania that didn't even start counting their mail-in ballots until yesterday. Talk about how mail-in ballots could give us a false sense of where things stand right now.
Yeah, actually, and this is truly one of the outrages. So I spent a lot of time over the past 10 days talking to secretaries of state in the key battleground states. And in places like Georgia and Florida and Texas and Arizona and Ohio, they do something very sensible, which is when a ballot comes in over the mail, they begin to process it. And it takes time because it comes in the mail, and election officials have to make sure that the addresses line up, that the person who sent it is a registered voter, that person hasn't already voted. They have to mark it in the system so they won't vote again on election day. They have to check the signatures in some states. It takes time, every single vote, much more time consuming than the tabulations that happen when you go to a polling place. And it makes sense to prepare that as it comes in. But in Pennsylvania especially, and to a certain extent Michigan and Wisconsin, they were not processing the votes until Election Day. And in Pennsylvania, that's because the Republican Party of Pennsylvania resisted efforts to change the law because we knew that there was going to be a lot of mail-in vote this year, much more because of the pandemic. And they resisted this, so the process didn't even begin. That's why it's going to take time in Pennsylvania. It takes time to go through, open the ballots, check them, check the voter rolls, and do what needs to be done. But here's the thing. Republicans tend to vote on Election Day. Democrats are more likely to vote by mail or to vote early. Part of that was driven by the president himself, who was invoking the idea of fraud with mail-in vote and the like. But in the state of Pennsylvania, for instance, those who voted by mail were voting for Joe Biden in the votes that have been counted so far to the tune of about 78% of those ballots were going to Joe Biden. Now, the day of vote was going for Donald Trump. So you have the day in Pennsylvania, the day in the voting is counted first. Therefore, it looks like you have a big Trump lead, but then you start counting the mail-in vote. In Arizona, it's the exact opposite, because Arizona was already preparing their mail-in vote. That's why you've seen Biden's lead start to shrink as they go through the process of counting the day of votes. So, there was a lot of talk of red mirage. Some states had a red mirage where it looked like Trump was doing better. Some states had a blue mirage where it looked like Biden was doing better.
John, I'm curious about something, and you may not even be able to answer it. How much do you think Russian interference played in the election?
I don't know. I can tell you this, that there were a lot of battles that were being waged by the U.S. government in cyberspace. There were, I am told, attacks on election systems that were coming in most prominently by Russia and by Iran that were thwarted. There's no evidence that any ballot system was the integrity of any ballot system was breached by any of that. The Russians were also clearly waging a propaganda effort, but at this point it's hard to say.
It is hard to say, and we don't know if Facebook wouldn't do much about it anyway. But let me ask you this then. As people were voting, the country was also seeing a rise in coronavirus cases in 40 states, right? Now, how did the virus play out with voters, and how much was it on people's minds, do you think? Because it was really on my mind, and one of the things that I thought would really duke Trump in was the coronavirus and the way he's dealt with it. And yet, I wonder how much it played into it. What do you say?
It was heavily on people's minds, but there were some surprising data in the exit polls in some of the states. In Ohio, for instance, to the question of what do you approve or disapprove of the government's handling of the pandemic? Now, it said the government's handling. It didn't say Trump's handling. But do you approve of the government's handling? And a majority actually said they approved. And this is as Ohio is seeing a huge spike in coronavirus. I think there was also a lot of resistance and frustration with the fact that so much of the economy in several states is still shut down. And Trump exploited that. That's done for health reasons, obviously. But I think there was some frustration. And maybe in a state like Florida, which opened up rather quickly, saw a spike, but didn't see anything catastrophic as what we saw in New York, for instance. Maybe that ended up in a strange way helping Trump. And by the way, there was no sense in the state of Florida that he really lost among senior citizens. The county I looked to was Sumter County. That's where the Village is. That's the largest retirement community, around. And it's Trump country. Trump won it big last time. And there was a lot of speculation going into the election. Would there be a gray revolt because of how he's handled it? Would, Biden make inroads in the villages? And in fact, Trump did almost exactly the same in the villages, except he got more votes. They both did. Both sides had more people turning out. But he performed almost exactly as well as he did 4 years ago, despite the pandemic. So no great revolt.
It's kind of crazy, with all this stuff that he's been saying. Maybe we should pay attention. Maybe there has been somebody messing with the outcome. Because, when you're ahead, you would think you wouldn't want people messing with it. So maybe now we have to look and make sure that every vote gets counted.